Welcome to Bahamas Educational Express Social Studies lesson, Free at Last. Learners will be able to outline the experiences of a slave from Africa to the New World, define the words slave, freedom, free, and emancipation, discuss the importance of being free. All the people living in Africa were free. The young children can run freely among the hills and the valleys. However, a bad time came for them. Some new people came to their land and to their villages. They were from Europe, and they took the strong men, the beautiful women, and the innocent children. They tied them together with chains and they herded them off like animals. The people of Africa did not go meekly. They resisted. Some chose death rather than to be taken. Here we see how they were chained by the hand and by the neck. The rest of the Africans were marched to the coast and made to board a special ship built to carry enslaved people. The captain and the crew were white. The ship carried the Africans away to new lands far from the shores of Africa. Here they are aboard the ship. Here, where they were arrested and they were chained to posts. They were packed into a narrow, stinking space and only allowed on deck once a day for a little exercise and fresh air. The Africans arrived across the ocean in a crowded ship. The voyage across the Atlantic is called the Middle Passage. It was the most cruel thing for one group of people to do to another. The infamous transatlantic slave trade. So, this is how it was operated. First, the Europeans came from Europe. They arrived in Africa. They forced the people to leave. They packed them into ships. They took them to the Caribbean, where they left them to work in the plantations. Here, they took the goods from the plantations and they took them to the Americas. And this continued until slavery was abolished. Here we see a group of Africans that were caught. When the Africans arrived in Nassau, they were taken to Vendu House, where they were put up for sale. Rich landowners made bids for them. They were taken away to the plantations. Here we have the Africans being auctioned off at Vendue House. The Africans became slaves and they were placed in two groups. One group was the house slave. House slaves worked for people in their homes. House slaves were usually treated better than field slaves. House slaves would usually work as servants or do housework. They would get extra food, clothing, and other things. The other group was the field slaves. Field slaves usually work outside in the fields. Field slaves weren't treated as well as house slaves. They would do all the work outside. Some men heard of the cruelty that many slaves suffered on the plantation. Some people in England tried to stop the slave trade. They also called for emancipation, which means freedom for enslaved people. Men who helped with the abolition of slavery or the stopping of slavery are Sir William Wilberforce and Granville Sharp. One day things began to change. People in other parts of the world learned about the terrible Middle Passage across the Atlantic. In 1804, the trade in African slaves across the Atlantic was forbidden, meant it was stopped. But slaves in the Bahamas were not yet free. They were free in 1834, 30 years later. This has been your social studies lesson, Free at Last.